Ladies and gentlemen, the Newton Nomadic Theater presents Story Slam.
So welcome everybody. My name is Jerry Riley. I'm with the Newton Nomadic Theater. How many of you never heard of the Newton Nomadic Theater? Oh, glad to. Yeah. So we're a traveling theater. We've been going on the run for 3 years. We get some of the best actors you'll see on any stage, any Boston stage. The actors who work with us work at all the big theaters, the Huntington, the New Rep, and all that. But we're a very different kind of theater. We put on very simply staged productions, and then we move every couple of nights from one non-theater space to another. So if we have a show opening up in a couple of weeks. It's called God of Carnage. It's going to open up. I'm trying to think. We're going to be in Woburn Square and a church, a living room in this church. We're going to be at Gregorian Rugs. We're going to be at Dungaren's Pub. Somebody's living room. So there's all these interesting venues you can see it. Small audiences and amazing acting. So if you're not on a mailing list, sign up and let you know. And the new one is called God of Carnage. It's directed by Paula Plum, very well known in Boston theater circles, and features Linda Getz, Philly Malidi, Nani Lewis, and Connor Maroney. So that will be opening up September 29th and run for a month. But tonight we're here for the Nomad Story Slam. This is something our theater does in between theatrical productions. Maybe 4, 5, 6 times a year we do these story slams. And typically we do them at Gregorian Rugs. But we're delighted to be here for the final of, the Hyde Center has had an amazing program all summer long of concerts, music, theater, whatever, and this is the last event of the summer. So I think I will hit it off. I'll kick the night off with my own story. And it's a story I told this summer at another event, and that night there was a theme, and the theme was on the run. So when I'm on the run, I need one thing, and I need a lot of it, and that's coffee. I'm a big coffee drinker, but if you're on the run, on the road, traveling around, I definitely have my coffee. Now, I like Starbucks, but when I'm on the run, I'd have to say Dunkin' Donuts is my go-to place because they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. Now, if I go to Dunkin' Donuts, I would typically just get myself a coffee. That would be my regular thing. But once in a while, I might get a donut too. I might get a cinnamon donut. I kind of like those. I'm kind of partial to the coconut donuts, maybe even a double chocolate. But the one thing you'll never see in my hand is a jelly stick donut. And you won't see it in my brother's hand, and you won't see it in my sister's hand, because it's not time. Now, a few years ago, my dad was pretty old, but he was in good health. He was doing pretty well. But he was getting a little frail. That sort of, you can't quite put your finger on it. Healthy but frail. And one day he tripped in his house, and he caught the corner of a coffee table, and he broke his rib. Now, I broke my rib about a year ago, and man, it hurt like hell, but you go and it heals pretty quick, and it turns out it's not that big a deal. But if you're old and frail, sometimes things can become a big deal. So he went in the hospital. They were going to keep him overnight. Showed up the next morning. There's been a complication. They're going to keep him another day. Next day, there's another complication, and on it went. And he was in the hospital for 5 weeks. And the longer he stayed there, the worse it seemed to get. Now, 5 weeks into it, one morning my mother came in, walked through the hospital room door, and was like stunned. There he was, sitting up. He was looking great. He was clear-eyed. He was lucid. He was just looking fabulous. And best of all, he was in a good mood. And he said, "This is the best I've felt since I got here 5 weeks ago." Well, my mother was delighted, and she said, "Well, is there anything I get for you?" And he said, "It's funny, when I woke up this morning, I was thinking of a Dunkin' Donuts jelly stick. And I can't get it out of my head." And she said, "Well, I'll go get you one. There's Dunkin' Donuts across the street," because there's always a Dunkin' Donuts across the street. So she went over, got him a big coffee and a jelly stick. She brought it back, and he laid into this, and he just, ate the whole thing, beginning to end, washing it down with coffee, savoring every bite. He was a happy man. Less than 24 hours later, he died. Now, my family, we're kind of on the ball. It didn't take us long to put two and two together and realize this was death by jelly stick. Now, a few years later, my mom got cancer, and she got diagnosed, and for about a year, over a year, she was doing fine. She was doing pretty good. But eventually, as often happens, it caught up with her. And so she was at home, and we had the nurses in, and she lived nearby, and I used to go in every morning. And I came in this one morning, and I said, how you doing, Mom? And she said, oh, gee, I feel terrible. And now this is a big deal, because my mother, she was a very stoic woman. She wasn't a complainer, so the idea that she was saying she felt bad was a big deal. She said, I just get pain everywhere. I just hurt I just hurt everywhere. She goes, I don't think I've ever felt this bad in my life. And then there was a long pause, and she said, but it's not time for the jelly stick. So, I hope I have many years left ahead of me. No reason to think I don't, but you never know. Nobody knows. And no matter how long you live, sooner or later, you're going to get to that last day. And when I get to my last day, I want to be surrounded by my loved ones, and I want to have a big cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee in this hand and a jelly stick in this hand, because America runs by Dunkin', but us Rileys, we die on their jelly sticks. Thank you. So can we get Robert Solomon? Come on up here, Robert.
This will be short. Good things and bad things happen to everybody, and you have a whole month or so of good things and then a month or so of bad things. Sometimes they're all at the same time, and that's really weird. So there's a long story, and some of you know how I got to where I am today. From 2003, when a hospital in Boston radiated my spine, causing a disease, and then hid the documents. And then in 2010, two incredible doctors realized that I didn't want to be stuck with all this morphine in me for the rest of my life, and I wanted to get out of that. One of those doctors was my brother, and the other one was the head of the pain clinic at the Brigham. And they really didn't do anything because it was in me. I wanted to get someplace. I wanted to teach at college. So they facilitated things. They put in a pump. They converted me from morphine to Dilaudid, and then weeded me off of the Dilaudid. Supposedly it's less invasive. In 2015, the disease had caused so much problems with my spine that it was completely bent over and twisted. So a third of my spine is steel rods and pins. But I was still going forward. I wanted my master's degree. 42 years after I got my bachelor's at Pratt, I went to the museum school and got my master's degree. And then in order to teach, there was no way I was going to take the T every day to teach in Boston. It's too complicated in a wheelchair. I've done it for the 2 years I was going to school, so I needed transportation independence. I started a GoFundMe campaign in September 2016. So many people from Newton were so kind and donated. In fact, Jerry and his theater group gave me a big chunk, which was really nice. But $4,200 by December wasn't going to buy me a $37,000 Honda Odyssey with leather seats. So I started writing to foundations, and I was still positive. I was going to get a teaching job, and I needed this van. The 20 foundations, I asked for $5,000 each, and as a researcher from years ago, I knew that I would get a certain percentage back. I figured I would get $22,500 back. I would add it to the $4,200 that I got on GoFundMe, get a small loan, and get my van. Well, I got nothing. But the assistant executive director of the Lenny Zakem Fund, Lenny Zakem was a patient of my brother's, but they didn't make the connection. She hand wrote a letter to me in the mail. I got a letter in the mail from her. I've never seen this before. Well, a long time ago. And she suggested the Letters Foundation. And I looked it up, and the Letters Foundation was started by Doris Buffett when she moved to Boston to give away her brother's money. And I went through this process for 6 weeks of providing financial stuff, interviewing. They checked all my references. They finally called me up at the beginning of February last year and said that and I asked them for $5,000. So now I'm thinking all these things happen, that I'm going to get this $5,000 for them. Well, they called me up and they said they were giving me $34,000. And they sent it to Bernardi Honda. I added the other money and I got my van. And it sat out in the parking lot here for a month because I couldn't drive it because I have no feeling in my legs and feet. So then Mass Health came into the picture. Mass Rehab came into the picture. And I went through all the stuff that you have to do when you go to Mass Rehab. And they paid $31,000 to have the van converted. So now I have a van, I have my master's degree, but I have no teaching experience. And every single job I saw required 1 to 2 years of teaching experience. So for 6 months I sent out resumes, got nothing. And then 3 weeks ago, the dean of Mount Wachusett Community College called me, and she said, "We just heard that our history professor isn't coming back. Are you interested?" And I said, "Sure." I was interviewed 2 days later, and 2 days after that I was hired. So I'm now an adjunct professor at Mount Wachusett Community College to teach, and I've never taught before. I've lectured since 1989, and my lectures are completely interactive. I don't like to stand up and just talk at people. So in my interview, they asked me questions like, how would you grade, and all this stuff, and I just was myself. And there were other people in the waiting room waiting to be interviewed, and they all looked like professors. And people ask me, why do I think they look like professors? I don't know, I make these judgments. And they gave me the job. They liked my story. I told them the same story I just told you, that I fought to get my life back. So they gave me this chance, and I got the syllabus that they sent me that the previous professor wrote based on this horrific text. And I went to the dean of curriculum and I said, "Do I need to use this?" She said, "No." So I have set up a class and we're having a lot of fun. We have music, we talk about art, we talk about the tools you need. Next Tuesday morning, Mount Wachusett has a pathway that you can walk through to a pond. I'm going to take them there, let them look at the trees and the sky and see the whole picture, and then tell me what the pieces are that make up that picture. So I'm really excited about this course, and I'm pretty sure they're going to hire me for next semester too. So I reached my goal. On the other hand, and this is the end, last week, my younger son lives in College Station, Texas. College Station got almost 30 inches of rain in that storm. It was pretty terrifying for me because I worry too much. This week, my sister lives on the coast of Florida, my youngest sister, and she won't leave her house because she doesn't want her to leave her dogs alone. So when I'm not teaching, which is Tuesdays and Thursdays, I pick my mother up at work. She's 93 and she still works full time. She runs the PACE program for the Executive Office for Elder Affairs. And she's been doing this for 45 years. And every year they offer her money to retire, and she won't take it. So I pick her up yesterday, and I said to her, "Have you heard from Sue Ann?" And she yelled at me all the way down the turnpike because I was there and Sue Ann wasn't. So, it's a little of this and a little of that, and it has to balance out. And at the end, everything's cool. And that's the story.
Can we get one of my favorite storytellers up here, Mike Riley?
Did you ever know somebody that people just tell stories about? Every time the name comes up, they tell a story. Professor Daniel Rohr, who was a PhD speech professor at Boston College when I went there, he was one of those guys that you just had. So I'm going to tell you 4 Dan Rohr stories. Dan, although he was a professor, really looked and acted like a student. And one time I said to him, because he wasn't really that disciplined a person, I said, "How did you do the research for your PhD thesis?" This is the first story. And he came from Ohio, and he had a very slow, kind of ponderous way of talking. And he said, "Well, Michael, that's a very interesting story." He went to Oberlin. He said, I was at the Oberlin Library one evening, and I was very, very high. And I fell asleep. And when I woke, I had a crick in my neck. And when I went to examine why I had a crick in my neck, I realized I had fallen asleep on a wooden box. And I opened the wooden box, and inside I found the books and records and minutes of the Oberlin Young Ladies Debate Association, which I knew was the oldest debate association. And so that box was how I did my research, my PhD thesis. And that was how he got his thesis. He always gave you good advice, and this is the second story. He was my debate coach, and myself and my debate partner, John Meany, we became friends with him. He wasn't just our coach. We were over his apartment one night, and as you do when you're in college, the 3 of us got drunk. And as happens when you're in college and you get drunk, I threw up. And Dan walked over and looked down at the ground in front of me and looked me in the eye, and he said, "Michael, I have some advice for you. When you eat a hot dog, you must chew it thoroughly." Third story about Dan Rohr. Dan bought a piece of land up in Maine from a guy who we found out later was a total con man. Dan bought this land sight unseen, 15 acres. And he asked John and I to go up with him to Maine to check out the land to try to clear some space to build a house. So we went up in Dan's station wagon, we drove up to Maine. It was the worst piece of land in Maine. Half of it was swamp, half of it was rocky and hilly. It was about 12 miles outside of the closest town. It was just kind of crummy scrub pine. It wasn't beautiful. It was just a horrible piece of land. But we worked the day trying to, clear the area, and none of us, I was a city kid, John was a city kid, but we did our best. That night we drove into town, had a terrible meal in this little town in Maine, and the waitress says to us, "There's a drive-in right outside of town, and they're showing The Exorcist tonight." So that seemed like a good thing to do in this town. It's actually scary to see The Exorcist at a drive-in in Maine. It's just kind of creepy. And we were driving back from the movie, and there's no, about 10 miles, there's no lights. And Dan suddenly says, "Did you ever feel as if you had a spirit or an entity inside of your body?" So we said, no, Dan, we never had that feeling. Have you had that feeling? And it was a long pause, and he said, "I'm not certain." So we get back to where we are. We have 3 pop tents. We're in the pop tent. I go into my pop tent. As I said, I grew up in the city. I'm not used to the sounds of a Maine forest. And after about an hour, I get out of my tent, and I went back to the station wagon, and I went to sleep in the back seat. I woke up in the morning, and John was asleep in the front seat. And I looked back, and Dan was asleep in the back. I mean, it was, the fourth story about Dan Rohr is my wedding. John and Dan were both groomsmen at my wedding, and I said to John, "Your only job is to get Dan to the hospital to the wedding on time, because Dan was always late for everything." So we show up at the wedding, and there's Dan and there's John, and they're there in their tuxedos. They look fine. The wedding goes off without a hitch. That's great. We go back to the reception, and we're supposed to take pictures of the bridal party, and there's no sign of John or Dan anywhere. And 20 minutes go by, half an hour goes by, probably about 45 minutes later, John and Dan show up, and we take the pictures, and I grab John, and I say, "Where the hell were you? What? And he said, "I went to pick up Dan, and Dan didn't have a shirt on, didn't have his jacket on." I said, "Dan, why don't you have your shirt or your jacket on?" And Dan said, "Well, actually, I cannot move my arm." And John looked at his arm, and he had a cut on his arm, and he had a red line from blood poisoning running up his arm. So John put his shirt on, put his coat on, took him to the wedding, and as soon as the wedding was over, took him to the Faulkner Hospital to get the blood poisoning treated. They gave him some emergency antibiotics, at which point John said, "We have to leave to go to a wedding." They said, no, you can't. John said, "No, I promise I'll bring him back." They get into an argument with the doctor. The doctor finally said he can go to the wedding, but he can't dance. So that's what they did. They went to the wedding. As soon as the festivities were over, they left and went back to the hospital. Dan was just one of those guys that you had stories about. A couple of years after we got married, we heard, unfortunately, he'd been up in the land, in his land in Maine. He died of a heart attack at a very young age. They had a memorial service for him, and we spent the entire night telling Dan Rohr stories. He was just a lovely guy, and he's a guy that I still miss to this day.
I bet that camera guy's got a story. Come on up here, Walt Frankel.
Good evening, folks. So I think you'll all agree with me that what's going on in our country right now is absolutely horrific. To see people walking around with swastikas and Klansmen and all kinds of stuff like this, just really makes me very upset. This brings me back a long time, back to 1980 when I was about 15 years old. And my mother and father were divorced, and my mother moved back up to the Northeast Philadelphia with my grandmother. She lived in the Kensington neighborhood, which is, if you've seen the Rocky movies, they're standing around the burning trash can, cooking potatoes or whatever they're doing, and the trains going up, overhead. That's the neighborhood. I mean, it's a real blue collar, very, kind of a tough neighborhood. And my mother, my grandmother passed away, and my mother was living there alone at the house. And my mother was a very, very sweet woman. She was a really good person, and what she did at the end of her life, she actually taught TOEFL, Test of English as a Foreign Language, to immigrants. And she did this on a volunteer basis, and she knew people from Vietnam and Afghanistan and all different countries. And she did this, basically on a volunteer basis. She got to know a family from Afghanistan, very well, and they lived on one block over, like literally, like just the next block over from her. And she realized that they were being taken advantage of by a slumlord. So my mother, with the little money that she had, she actually bought the house next door to her, and rented it to them at basically below market rates, just because she was just a good person. Now this neighborhood was basically a very, very blue collar and very nasty neighborhood. My mother used to refer to it as lily white bunker land. That, you know, everybody in the neighborhood, in every house, there was an Archie Bunker in every house, in a very racist, you know, prejudiced neighborhood. There was a motorcycle gang that used to patrol the neighborhood, and they actually provided security for the neighborhood and made sure that people that weren't like everybody else in that neighborhood didn't walk through that neighborhood. They were known as the Warlocks, and there actually would be signs up on the signposts, you know, support your local Warlocks, and old ladies would like come out with like $5 and flag down the motorcycle gang and hand them money, you know, to actually keep the neighborhood safe. I actually would get stopped by them because they didn't recognize me from the neighborhood when I would visit my mother on the weekends, and you know, they were pretty scary. You know, little did the old ladies know that they were also the you know, largest producer and distributor of methamphetamine in, you know, basically North America. Anyway, the long story short is that so my mother let these people move into the house. It was a weekday. I remember this because I got a call from my mother, and she says, "Walter," she says, "the neighborhood is rioting." And I was like, "Well, why?" She goes, "Well, the people that I let move into the house next door, they're out in front of the house. They're screaming, they're yelling. I'm scared." And I was like, "Okay." So you know, I went and visited one of my kind of seedier friends, and I said, "Look, I need something, right? I need some help." So we go down to Market Street in one of these really seedy stores, and I buy, like, you know, a blackjack and some brass knuckles and a truncheon and all the knives and stuff, and I load up all this stuff, and I get on the train and I go up to, you know, to my mother's house, you know, take care of my mother. And I get to my mother's house, and sure enough, there's about 200 people, like the entire block was out in front of the house, like screaming, like, you know, yelling at this house, you know, like these people that had just moved in. And the public relations police were there, and they were sort of keeping the people away from the front door. So I get in the house, and I'm like, "Mom, what's going on?" She goes, "The people are disgusting. They're out there. They're yelling things at these poor people next door." She goes, "I don't know what to do," and she's, you know, scared. And so one of the things that my friend actually gave me before I went up to the house was he goes, I don't have a pistol for you. He says, "But now I'm 15 years old, right?" He goes, "I don't have a pistol for you, but I got a starting pistol." He goes, and all I got to do is, like, you know, wave this out the window and just like yell crazy stuff, and people will scatter. So sure enough, so I get the starting pistol, and, like, you know, like, so this goes on for about 3-4 hours, and I'm like, I'm sick of this, right? So I open the window and I do exactly what it says. Like, "Get," you know, I'm like brandishing this thing around, and people are diving behind cars. I'm actually kind of laughing about this. You know, they didn't go away, but they stayed. And this was after the cops had left. And they, you know, this went on for quite a while. I mean, I think it was at least 3 or 4 days that these people were out in front of the house, and it was just, it was unbelievable, you know, just to see this kind of hatred and just the ridiculousness. I mean, really, these people already lived like 1 block away, and the fact that they had been moved onto that block, onto my mother's block, they just incensed these folks. And so, you know, at the end of the thing, you know, like 3 days later, my mother's like, "Look," she gets up and she goes, "I've had enough of this." And she goes out to the front door, and I'm standing behind her, and she opens the front door, and people are still there, and they're all like yelling, you know. And my mother goes, "You people are disgusting." She goes, "I'm telling you, if you don't cut this out and get out of here right now, I'm selling both of these houses, selling both of these houses to black families." And sure enough, they all kind of like looked at us, and, like, you know, within about a half an hour, they dispersed. But that didn't end then. I mean, basically, my mother was known throughout the entire neighborhood. You know, we would walk to the store. I would go up there every weekend and walk to the store with her and go food shopping, and, like, you know, people would spit at us. You know, just, you know, people that she knew, you know, people that I knew when I was a kid used to go and visit my grandmother, and the neighbors and stuff. I mean, they wouldn't even say hi or anything. I mean, basically, we were outcasts at that point, and it was just a very, very sad time. But, you know, what's going on today, you know, kind of just brought that all back. So, you know, sorry for the depressing story, but you know, hopefully, you know, hopefully we can get past all this. All right.
We got Bob Jackson up here.
I'm going to talk about crime and punishment. but not about Dostoevsky. I want you to cast your mind back to Northern Ireland, city of Derry, stroke London Derry, and the school was St. Colum's College in Derry, and that's where I went to school. Many people prefer to get any punishment over with really early, and I did too, and I still do, I think, because when I was 16, I was incredibly immature, and I was dragged into something which was called the persecution of the McAteer family. The McAteers were a very, very nice family who lived next door to an acquaintance of mine called Desmond Day. And Desmond and the son of the family, Sean, had fallen out. And he said, "Mom, I don't want to live next door to the McAteers anymore. I want to move." And his mother said, who was she was the headmistress of a local school, and she said, "Don't be so ridiculous. You're 16 years old. Grow up." But he decided, well, if they're not going to move, or if we're not going to move, then I'm going to try and make them move next door. So he got a bunch of kids, and I was included, and he said, right, well, what we want to do is send lots of stuff to their home. So they sent lots of stuff to the home next door. They sent a farmer's load of manure, which landed outside the front door of their neighbours. And they didn't have a front garden. It was a pavement, and it was a townhouse. So that was very inconvenient. They phoned up the local newspaper and said, "Hello, this is Mr. McAteer, and I want to put this car up for sale in the newspaper. Green Corsair, low mileage. Call it 16 Marlborough Street after 6 p.m. Monday to Friday." And the bill went to their house. We sent a hearse up to the house. I was asked to send away to the London Sunday Times for complete works, leather-bound volumes of John Steinbeck novels, and which could be returned in 28 days if not wholly delighted. Another kid sent French black lacy lingerie to the house, and it went on and on and on. And we all said, well, what would happen if we were caught? The neighbour's mother was beside herself with worry. Who are these people persecuting us? And she thought, I bet it's Desi Day and his gang. So they told the local president of the local school, who called Desmond in and said, "Tell us the names of all the people involved and we will go easier on you." So we were all caught instantly. I was sitting outside a beautiful facade of the school. I was in a porta-cabin, a leaky science porta-cabin, called up into the president's office. I'd never been there before. And he was sitting there. He was a Catholic priest, and he was sucking on his pipe like Sherlock Holmes. There was a roaring fire and a deep pile carpet. I thought, my goodness, this is luxurious. But good morning, Father. Jackson, is this your handwriting? And I saw the little piece of paper which I'd filled in to send off for the John Steinbeck books. And he said, is this your handwriting? I said, I guess it must be, Father. And he said, well, and also with this business of the car, where were you when this car was put up for sale? I said, well, half in and half out of the telephone box. Now, all the other kids were suspended from school for a week, and I wasn't. They had their punishment very quickly, a week's suspension. Meanwhile, there was a slight problem between home and school. My father had a newsagent's shop, and the priests used to run up large newspaper bills without paying them for a long time. So they didn't really want to have too much toing and froing between home and school. And a couple of weeks went by, maybe a month went by, and we had to do something called 40 hours devotion, where there would be an exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, and you had to go to the local school, local church, and sit and pray before this for 15 minutes. And I'd said, listen, I can't do this on Friday evening. I have to collect the paper money for my father's shop, and can I do it on Saturday morning? And so I thought, there's going to be no communication between home and school. My mother phoned the school to say, my four sons cannot come to the exposition of the Blessed Sacrament because they're helping their father collect paper money in the store. I thought, no. I was actually in the bathroom, in the bath. We lived in a bungalow, and the rooms were all off a central hallway. And she was on the phone, and I heard every word. And all of a sudden, I heard, what, Father? What, Father? My son Robert? Involved in the persecution of the McAteer family? I've heard of nothing about this. And all of a sudden, the phone went down, and the bathroom door was pounded in by with the largest saucepan that my mother possessed. Now, she could have killed me if she'd swung it, but she simply pushed it into my back. I was more concerned about my nakedness in the bath and my mom and so on. I'd already said to my siblings, if we're caught, and she said, did you know anything about this? You say, no, we knew nothing about this, but we think it's very funny. It didn't work. I'd sweated blood really for about 6 weeks before my parents finding out. And it was much, much worse of a punishment than if you're punished quickly after a crime. When it comes to punishment, crime and punishment, give me the short, sharp shock. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to tell you another story. Generally we have a theme for the night. Tonight we don't have a theme, but I'm gonna stick with my personal theme. You know, I already told one story. This one's gonna follow on. So a number of years ago, one night the telephone rang, and it was our friend Zini. She lives down in New York, and she said, "How'd you like to go to India?" She had arranged to swap her little apartment in New York for a big apartment in New Delhi. And she said, you know, come along. I got a place. It's going to be great. So we had never been there, and so my wife and I said, absolutely. So we signed up, and off we went to India. We had an amazing time. It was probably the best vacation I ever had. Just every day you're just overwhelmed with, you know, sights and sounds and smells and things that you've just never seen. And we had a great time for about 2 weeks. Mostly in New Delhi and various other places. But at the end of the trip, Zini wanted to go to a place I'd never heard of. It was called Varanasi. And it was a couple hundred miles away. And this was going to be for part of her trip. She definitely wanted to go to this place. So we flew to Varanasi, and we got out of the plane, and we got a cab, and we get into the cab, and we're driving down the road, and you know, like all the big roads in India, it's complete mayhem. There's buses and cars and bicycles and cows, and it's just, you know, there's a three-ring circus of a road. And the cab driver like switches into tour guide mode, and he says, Varanasi is a very ancient city. Wherever you live, when you die, you must bring the dead body to the river Ganges in Varanasi. People come from all over. Oh, dead body! And he points, and there's a car going by, and there's a bundle on the roof of the car, all kind of wrapped up, and he's saying that dead body, and we're like, no, it can't be. It's like, you know, it's 85 degrees, it's the middle of the day, it's hot and sunny, and I'm kind of freaking out. This is like somebody's got a dead body strapped to the roof of the car. But he goes on, You live 50 miles, 100 miles, it doesn't matter. When you die, the dead body must be brought to the river. Oh, dead body, and he points, and there's another car going by, and there's another bundle on the roof, and now I'm getting like, this is just too bizarre. So he drives us to our hotel. It's some little hotel right in the outskirts of the city. We go in, we check in, we go to the room, we're unpacking our bags, and then something happens that's just totally out of character for me. My wife has got a great imagination. She is, I'm an engineer. I tend to be more kind of, down to earth, and she's the one with the big imagination. But all of a sudden there was this role reversal. We get into this room, and I smell something. It's a faint smell, but it's this very smell that's going right to the core of me, and I get it in my head, and I cannot tell you to this day if this is true or not. But at that moment, I got it in my head that that's what I'm smelling. I'm smelling a dead body. That it's coming through the ventilation systems of one of those corpses, or somewhere in this hotel, there's one of those dead bodies, and I'm smelling rotting human flesh, and I'm just getting like spiraling out of control. My wife and Zini are like, relax, and I will not be calmed down. I'm like, I can't stay here. I can't stay here with like rotting human flesh coming in, and I'm like I say, totally out of character, but I will not be, talked out of it. So we end up moving the hotel, and my wife and our friend Zini are just like, he's a little gaga. But anyway, we moved to a different hotel. Now, the next morning, Zini had read about this, and she wanted to do this. We set the alarms, and we got up before dawn, and we go down to the river, and we find a guy with a little boat to take us out on the river as the sun comes up. And when the sun goes up in Varanasi, the whole city comes down to the river, and everybody bathes in the river. And it's just a wild scene, if you can imagine. Just all these people pouring down the ghats, the riverbanks, and into the water. And the sun is just peeking up on the far side of the river, and our little boatman is paddling us out. And as he does, he switches into tour guide mode, and he says, "Varanasi is a very ancient city. When you die, you must bring the dead body to the river. Poor man, they burn the dead body in the factory." And he points, and there's a big building on the riverbank, and you realize, oh, that's a crematorium. He says, "Rich man, they burn the dead body in the wood fire." And he points up, and there's different places down the river, there's big fires, and you realize, my God, those are funeral pyres. And on the nearest one, when he points it out, you can see like a bone, an arm, like sticking out of this fire. And like, this is getting weirder and weirder. And he says, 3 people no burn dead body. Holy man, no burn a body. Mother with a child, no burn body. Little baby, no burn the body. They take the dead body, wrap it in cloth, tie with ropes, you put big rocks. Take the dead body to the middle of the Ganges. Throw the body over, down to the river, blub, 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 blub. 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, the fish, they eat the ropes. The ropes break, the body float to the top of the Ganges and down the river. Holy river, no bacteria. And at this point, I'm like, this is the most insane thing I've ever heard. But in years after that, years later, I found myself in Ireland carrying my mother-in-law's dead body on my shoulder as we walked out of her house, and we walked down the middle of the street in the city where all the neighbors came out of their houses and bowed their heads, and to see her dead body for the last time being sort of paraded through the streets. And a few years after that, my brother and then my mother died, and then my father, and we took their bodies and we filled them with chemicals, and we put them on display for all of our friends and family to come and see their preserved body before it was buried in the ground. And I realized, in the time since then that, I learned something on the river that day, and it's that death is a weird and bizarre and strange thing, and wherever you live in the world, we all have really weird, ways of dealing with death, and they're all very bizarre and they're all really strange. And the other thing I learned on the river that day was a wonderfully blunt expression, and I still use it to this day, and I always say it with just a hint of an Indian accent, and that's "dead buddy." Thank you. Do we have anybody in the audience who would like to get up and tell a story? No? No? Okay. All right, we're gonna do something a little different. This is not the normal format, but we're gonna get Mike Riley up here again, and he's gonna tell you a story in a slightly different form.
What I always say is this is a 100% true story. John Camo was a client of mine, 25 years old. Wife, 3 kids on the coast of Maine, fishing out in the cold. Well, he worked at sea 10 hours a day, 25,000 a year. Saturday night in an Elks Club hall, drink life away in his beer. 25 years is an awful long time, 25 years to life. 25 years is an awful long time, would you tell my wife? John LePierre, he smuggled pot, 25 tons at a time. From Miami to New England's coast, never even paid a fine. Well, LePierre had a mother ship sitting off the coast of Maine. 25,000 for one night's work, want 'em quiet, dumb, and tame. 25 years is an awful long time, 25 years to life. 25 years is an awful long time, would you tell my wife? John LePierre got caught that night, so did John Camo. Figured first time I won't get caught, how was he to know? LePierre, he cut a deal, 25 million in talk. Help convict a bunch of your friends, then we'll let you walk. Wait a minute, one more. LePierre named everyone, including John Camo. Couldn't remember an awful lot about the man who made the dough. 25 years is an awful long time, 25 years to life. 25 years is an awful long time, would you tell my wife? Well, John Camo drew mean Judge Taft, his robe and his heart were black. He dismissed that jury with a wink and a nod, 25 minutes they're back. That's the tale of John Camo, never was a lucky man. Doing 25 in a federal pen, LePierre's working on his tan. 25 years is an awful long time, 25 years to life. 25 years is an awful long time, would you tell my wife? One more time. 25 years is an awful long time, 25 years to life. 25 years is an awful long time, would you tell my wife?
Mike is a lawyer, and some of his best stories involve crazy client stories, including that one. So, like that. So, anybody else?
One of the secrets that lawyers have is you all tell lawyer stories, we tell client stories.
So, any other takers there in the audience? Does somebody want to tell a story? All right, yeah.
Sorry, I like to move around because it's harder to hit a moving target. I can't see. Are there any Jewish folks out there? Does the June 1967 mean anything? You don't remember? Thank you. So in June of 1967, I was just about finishing my 2 years in the Peace Corps in Nigeria. And one of the things the Peace Corps did for us volunteers is they gave us a book locker And in there was the Alexandrian Quartet by Lawrence Durrell. If you haven't read it, it takes too long now. Maybe it's a movie, I don't, but it's extraordinary. And of course, after reading it, I said, I want to go to Alexandria. But just as my tour of duty of service was finishing, a war broke out in Nigeria, the Biafran war, the civil war, and we were told to get out as quickly as we can. So now I'm in the capital in June 1967 and making plans as to where I want to go. And I know where I want to go. I want to fly to Cairo and then make my way up to Alexandria. And what happened?
16 what?
Thank you. Ruined my plans. I made some alternative plans. I had a bag. It was a leather bag, like a knapsack. And off I went to Europe for the next 3 months, just traveling around everywhere. I'd never been to Europe before. Born and raised in the Bronx. The trip to me was going to New Jersey. So I make my way across. Now, I have to say, my parents were both born in Ireland. And my father comes from County Cavan, which is just kind of northwest of Dublin. And I'd written to my aunt telling her that I was coming. And so about 3 months later, I make my way into Cavan. And this is so typical of Ireland, and probably a lot of other small countries. What I had was kind of a vague address. Now, in Ireland, in the country, they don't have signs that say Center Street. They just have roads and houses. And so I needed to find out where Claire and Kevin Riley were. Yes, I'm an O'Reilly. Everybody else in my family is Riley. That's another story. So I asked somebody, I'm looking for on a road. You were able to hitch in those days with not too much trouble. So I'm making my way around Cavan, and I asked somebody if I could take me out to, where Claire and Kevin Riley. Oh, Claire and Kevin, yeah, you of the Rhodes place. Now, Jerry may know this. There are so many damn Rileys in Cavan, they have to give them nicknames. So my grandfather was you of the road because his house, a little cottage, was right by the road. And so, oh yeah, I'll take it. It's just a way bit up the road. So they take me to this little cottage, drop me off, and I knock on the door. Door opens. This little old lady, couldn't have been probably that tall. Black dress, she opens the door, takes one look at me, slams the door in my face. Now, I've been on the road for 3 months, and I'm coming to Ireland, my ancestral home, and the door is slammed in my face. The door opens, and it's my Aunt Claire. And she welcomes me. She knew I was Barney's son. I had written to her. What I found out was this was my grandmother. Now, she took one look at me. I had a sack on my back. I had a beard that was 3 or 4 months long, and she knew I was a tinker. They're like gypsies. She was not letting a tinker in her house. So we all straightened that out. And the other thing about my grandmother, who was probably in her early 90s at this point, they have, once a year in Cavan, they would put up a tent and they'd have these big bands. They call them show bands. They'd be playing music and people would come out to be dancing. And I was sitting, waiting to go out. And my grandmother sits next to me and she looks down and she just turns to me and says, "You know the girls won't be dancing with you if you got scruffy shoes. You better fix your shoes." So I had to clean my shoes up and off we went. Now, that was sort of the end of this trip. A lot of nice things happened, but a couple of years later, I remember my Aunt Claire sent me a Christmas card and greetings and all the rest. And at the end, she wrote, "When are you coming home?" That's Ireland. And I had never been there before. I've been there since, but this was my home for her. And I'll never forget that. And we're going to, hopefully, we'll be going again this summer. But there's something wonderful about a family that you haven't met before that just welcomes you again and saying, when are you coming home?
I've got a little story, a really little story. Years ago, I lived down in New York, and one afternoon, it was a Sunday afternoon, things were quiet, it was the Upper West Side, crossing Broadway, it's a big, big, wide intersection, sunny day, light changes, and I start walking, and way over there, coming the other way, is this guy, and he looks like he's, you know, he's kind of sad-looking guy, he's kind of grubby, his clothes are kind of disheveled, and he's got this cup, and he's sort of leaning over, and he's shuffling across the street, coming towards me. And so we cross paths in the middle of the street. I just happen to have a big pocket full of change. So just as we passed, I reached into my pocket, pulled out all the change, and threw it into his full cup of lemonade. And the two of us, I don't know who was more shocked, he or me. And I just kept walking. That's my story. So any other stories out there? Come on up.
Hi, this is a pretty quick story. It's about my uncle. Now, sadly, my uncle's no longer with us. He died about 10 years ago or so. But and I really regret not spending more time with him when he was still alive. He had the best stories, and this is one that must have taken place probably in the late 60s, early 70s. At the time, he was working in a small town in southern New Jersey, and he and this fella he worked with every day would go to lunch at the local diner. They would always go there, same time every day, and they would sit there and they would talk about all kinds of stuff, but they would often wind up talking about the local bank, and specifically about if they were to rob the local bank, how they would do it. And, you know, they weren't, you know, particularly discreet about this. They weren't keeping quiet. So I guess a bunch of people at the diner overheard them talking about this all the time. Well, a couple months later, the local bank actually gets robbed. And, you know, next day, the police come looking for him. They come looking for him at the diner where he is for lunch, like every single day. And they ask him, you know, tell us about how you robbed the bank. Now, of course, he didn't do it, and his friend didn't do it either. They weren't involved. So they, you know, they cleared this whole thing up pretty quickly, but it was a great story how the police came and asked him about robbing the bank. And after that, they didn't talk about how they would rob the bank anymore. Thank you.
Any other takers there? What do you say, Walt? Did you say you had another one there? Come on up here.
Every once in a while, an angel comes into your life. Just comes down, helps you out, tucks you in, takes care of you, and then disappears. So every year I go to Truro, Massachusetts on the 4th of July. I've been doing this for the last 30 years. And I was down there with my business partner at the time. I was 22 years old. My girlfriend became my wife, now my ex-wife. His girlfriend, who became his wife, he's still married. And we had tradition, we would get these little cottages right on the beach. And the girls would stay, you know, at the beach during the day. We would go on 4th of July and we'd rent a boat and we'd go out fishing. Not a whole lot of fishing got done. You know, we'd go out there and sort of troll around in the bay. So we go down to Flyers boat rental down in Provincetown, like we always did, and we get there, it's a huge line. And we're sitting there and we're like, well, we're not even going to get a boat, you know, and we're just sitting there and we're waiting to get up to the counter to rent the boat. And we see at the end of the pier is this absolutely stunning, gorgeous woman, like something like out of Baywatch, basically wearing a red, bathing suit, just gorgeous. And so we're kind of just standing there, sort of starstruck, kind of checking her. Now she works there. She's kind of peripherally involved. She's sort of helping out, but maybe she's like the girlfriend of the owner or the wife of the owner or something like that. But she's not really working, but she's sort of helping and doing stuff. And she sees us standing there, and she comes walking right over to us, and we're kind of like looking at her, and she kind of walks right up and kind of in slow motion, hair is kind of like Baywatch. And she gets up to us, and she goes, "Hey guys, how you doing?" And we're like. Like she's talking to us, and we're dorks, So we're basically completely starstruck here. We're like, what are you talking to us for? And basically she goes, "You guys doing some fishing?" And we're standing there with fishing rods. We're like, yeah, we're gonna go fishing. She goes, "Well, you want to rent a boat?" We go, "Yeah, we're gonna rent a boat." She goes, all right, we're gonna get you a good boat." So she takes us down to the dock, just bust the whole line, get down to the boats. And she goes, "How about this one over here?" I go, "Well, we usually get that one over there, with a small motor and the cheap one." She goes, "I'm gonna give you that boat for the same price." And we're like, yeah, that'd be great. We'll take that boat. And so she rates us up, and we get in the boat, and she's like, she goes, "Hey," she goes, there's a party over on the island. She goes, "Come on over there. If you're done fishing, come over to the island over there, and there's a party going on." And we're like, "Yeah, okay." So we get in the boat, we're trolling around the bay. We're not really going to go over to the island. We really don't have the time to do that. And so we see her screaming by in the bay on the speedboat, and she's speeding by. She goes, "Hey guys, come on to the island." She's like, waving us over to the island, and we're like, what's going on with this? What's over on the island? And so we never go to the island or anything. And of course, we're late with the boat. We're always late with the boat, and we get fined because if you're late after 6 o'clock, they want an extra fine and stuff. So we're always late with the boat. And we're dragging the boat up, and there she is, on the dock. "Hey guys, how you doing?" And we're like, "Oh man," "Oh, sorry, we're late with the boat and all this." She's like, "That's cool, don't worry about it," So she basically signs us off the boat, and we don't get fined the extra money or anything. So before we leave, she goes, "Hey, I'm having a party tonight at my house. You guys got to come over." She writes down her phone number and her address. She's like, "Come on by." And we're like, "Yeah, okay," we're like, she hands me the phone number, and I'm like, wow. So we get in the car, we go back to the shack, and we're late. And of course, the girls are gonna be pissed, right? We're supposed to be going out. It's 4th of July. So I'm saying to John, I'm like, "John, we're gonna have to take him some really good tonight." I said, "We're to make up for this because we're late again." And so we take them back down to Provincetown to the Lobster Pot, which is like kind of a really expensive kind of, touristy place. It has pretty good food. And if anybody's ever been there, it's a really long building. And if you come into it, it's kind of, you walk this long hallway, and then you come up these stairs, and you get to the hostess station. And literally, the place, there's a line all the way out the door. I mean, it's 4th of July, like 8 o'clock. I mean, Provincetown. So we said, well, let's walk up to the hostess station and see how long the wait's going to be. So we walk up, and we get up to the top of the hostess station, and we're standing at the hostess station, and we look over, and there she is. And she's standing there, and I look at John, and I'm like, and she goes, "Hey guys, how you doing? What's going on? You guys coming for dinner?" And I'm like, and I could feel my girlfriend's like dagger lasers in the back of her head, like, who is that? I mean, right? So she goes, all right, she grabs 4 menus and just seats us. And the nice big, 10 top table, right, overlooking, the best seat in the place. And we sit down, and we're like, how did that just happen? Now we're sitting at the table, she leaves, and the girl's like, "Who the hell is that? How do you know her? What is going on here?" And we're like, she was at the boat rental, we were just blabbering, So she comes back, and she sits down at the table with us, and she's like, "Hey guys, I'm gonna check in the back and see if they got any specials, and see if you guys get you something good." And we're like, okay. So she goes back in the kitchen, and again, she's not really working there. She's sort of like peripherally involved. She wasn't really the hostess. She was just there. And so she goes back in the back, and she comes back. She goes, "They got an 11.5-pound lobster back there." And me and John are looking at each other like, we're just out of college, And like, 11.5-pound lobster, the lobster pie. That's going to cost you like a small mortgage payment, right? So we're looking at each other like, oh, this is where the shoe drops, right? 11.5-pound lobster. She goes, We're gonna bake stuff it for you, all the fixings, chowder and everything, $100. And me and John were like, okay. She goes, all right. So she goes back in the kitchen. Sure enough, don't see her again. Dinner comes out. Sure enough, the thing's as big as the table. We're like, eating claws, we're eating lobster for like 3 days. And the bill comes, and literally, it's $100, even. And never saw her again, ever. Tucked us in with the boat, 11.5-pound lobster. Never saw the person again in my life. Can't explain it. Angel from above.
So 4 years ago, I decided to write a book about this artist that I studied with at Pratt. He died in 1994. He was an abstract expressionist. I never saw any of his paintings, but now I know a lot about them because I've done a lot of research on them. But I knew about his drawings. So the book is going to be about his drawings and why his name isn't in any books. And if you look on Google for this guy, Joe Stapleton, the only thing you're going to find out is that I've lectured on him for the last 4 years. So I see that the family, which is a niece and 2 nephews, have put all of his drawings that have never been seen in a small room in a warehouse in downtown Manhattan, stacked on top of each other. So I asked them if they could bring them up here to Boston so I could go through them and use them in my book. And as I'm going through them over the past few years, they're falling apart because most of them are on newsprint. And if you know anything about archiving drawings, you know that they fall apart if they're not taken care of. So I would ask them for money to buy archival materials to take care of these drawings. And they wouldn't give me any money. And then I was going to write my thesis for my MFA on Joe Stapleton and use the images in my thesis. And I called them up and I said, can I use these images? Because they owned the drawings. I didn't know that in Massachusetts you don't have to do that for a thesis. But they said no. And I said, well, why not? I mean, I'm going to make this guy famous again. They said, because you haven't shared the text of your thesis with us. I said, well, that wasn't part of the deal. I said, well, we want to know what you're writing about. I said, that's not part of the deal. So I never heard from them again, and I wrote several times to them to come pick up these drawings. And I figured there were about 3,000 drawings. It's a lot of drawings. They fill my apartment. So I never heard from them. I went to the Boston Arts and Business Council and had an attorney appointed from Duane Morris, and they were pretty good. They wrote to these people, and they didn't respond to him either. So we filed in federal court a complaint that they had to come pick up the drawings, or if they stayed with me for much longer, then Massachusetts law was going to allow me to keep them, which is what I wanted in the end anyway, because they could become pretty famous. So months go by, they're not responding to these demands from the court, and finally one day they get an attorney from Newton. They live in Brooklyn. And this Newton attorney calls my attorney and says, okay, my clients have decided that Solomon can keep the drawings for another 7 years, but they're going to retain editorial control on anything he writes. So my attorney laughed at that and hung up the phone. And 3 days later, that attorney called him again and said, my clients have had a change of heart. They don't want anything to do with Solomon anymore, and they don't want the drawings back. So I had to go through these drawings, photograph every one of them with a cell phone. They didn't have to be good actual images, just for the final agreement. And there weren't 3,000 drawings. There were 5,500 drawings. And amongst these drawings, artists back then used to trade work with each other. And I found 7 Japanese prints. And I just found out from a collector in Newton that 2 of them are hokusais. So I have an appointment with Sarah Thompson next week. She's the one who did the big show last year. And so as a continuation of sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen, I got rid of those cousins. I own the drawings. And maybe I'll be able to take a cruise someday. I'll rent a rowboat and row around Boston Harbor. So that's the story.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think we got a few drops of rain here, and I think we're gonna close it up for the night. But thank you all for coming. If you're not on our mailing list, get on there and come to see God of Carnage opening September 29th. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for the storytellers.
One more thing. Is that still live? No.
Yeah, I think, okay. Wrapping up the summer here. It's been a great summer at Hyde Playground. Just a reminder, many people know, Saturday night, November 4th, 6 o'clock, O'Hara's is going to have a big catered dinner. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Hyde Community Center building. So it's going to be a great night. It's going to be fun. Come on down. Free dinner, entertainment, dancing. Well, maybe not dancing. Okay. No, right here at Hyde Gym with November 4th, 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And also, pass the word, anyone, there's going to be a number of people who graduated from Hyde School, so there's going to be a Hyde reunion while at the same time.